Welcome to the session, Why More Startups and Investors Are Now Looking Towards Japan. I'm Shiho Watabe. I'm an advisor to the Shibuya city, and I work with the city to build a startup ecosystem in the city. I'll be moderating the session today. Before we start, let me give you a little introduction to Shibuya city. Shibuya has been the startup city in Japan since the 90s. A number of legendary companies came out of this place in the past few decades. And more recently, the city attracted global tech giants like Google, Stripe, and many others. Today, the city is home to over 2,000 startups, and Shibuya is dedicated to supporting new startups in the city. For foreign entrepreneurs, the city has a visa program and support to get your business ready in Japan. For all entrepreneurs, Shibuya offers holistic support, including office space and product implementation, while the city has more than 70 corporate partners in order to support the startups. To learn more, please visit our website. So with that aside, I'm introducing today's speakers who are a few of the most prominent movers and shakers in the industry. We have Justin Waldron, who is a co-founder and the president of Playco. Justin is based in Tokyo. Previously, Justin has co-founded Zynga, a unicorn gaming company based in San Francisco. Playco was founded in 2020 and has already raised $100 million Series A from investors including Sequoia Capital Global Equities and Dreamers VC by Will Smith. Justin is also an advisor to Shibuya Startup Support Team. Next, we have Mr. Nakajima from Deel. He's a country manager and head of expansion in Japan. Founded in 2019, Deel is currently valued at $5.5 billion. Deel provides employer of record services that allow companies of all sizes to painlessly hire anyone, anywhere in the world. Deel is leading a movement in the way companies hire and employees work around the world. Last but not least, we have Mark Bivens, who is the founder and managing partner of Shizen Capital. Mark is a Silicon Valley native and a former entrepreneur turned venture capitalist. Mark has spent the past 20 years as a VC, 15 in Europe and 5 in Japan, with a career track record of investment IRR over 150% annually. Mark's first VC fund in Japan has distributed 3.5 times cash returns in 4 years. His hobby is competing in triathlons, where he often finishes in last place. I love that last line. Okay, thank you for joining today, and I'm looking forward to learning from you all in our panel discussion. So let's dive in. I will ask 3 questions in total, and first question is, please tell us about your company and why your business decided to be in Japan. Justin, do you want to take this one first?
Sure, thanks, Shiho. Well, so Playco was founded with a very particular mission in mind, and the mission is to bring the world closer together through play. And what we realized through our experience in games was that Japan had created some of the world's most famous games and gaming franchises over the last few decades. And America had also brought in these new waves of technology when it came to social gaming and mobile gaming that were creating the new frontier of where games are going. And both countries could bring a unique perspective that could be combined with the latest in social networking to allow people to communicate in a new way. And we got excited about the idea of working with people in Japan who had the experiences from places like DNA and Gree, et cetera, and the sort of classic gaming companies in Japan, and also the expertise coming from the newer, younger companies like my former company, Zynga, and creating a more international company that could bring all the best ideas and experiences together. And so we think that the answer to the future about what games can be will be a combination of the experiences and the collective sort of knowledge of people who've been contributing to these many different gaming ecosystems over the last few decades. And so we were excited to start a game that was a company that was international first, and with Japan as a home base.
Thank you. So you see Japan as the gaming business capital of the world, and you are truly an international global company that happens to be based in Japan for a strategic reason. That's very cool. Thank you. So, Nakajima-san, do you want to go second?
Sure. Thank you for introduction, Shiho. So the first, I'd like to explain about that. What is the Deel? The Deel provide EOR services, and through the EOR services, the company can hire the employee in any countries without establishing their own entities. And the Deel has almost 150 legal entities around the world. And our services, the SaaS platform, and that's manage the creating the employee contract through the payroll on that single platform, and each the country's labor law, taxes, and social insurances we covers, and also we cover over 120 local currencies. Therefore, the startups doesn't need to need to know that these knowledges, and the company can hire the best talent from the global talent pools. So through the pandemic, our client like a Shopify, a Coinbase, a Notion, like the global unicorn, could hire the employees remotely, and they can increase the number of employees and grow the business. And why do we selected Japan as a market? That because our market, the Japan is a very huge. As you may know, the GDP is the third largest, and also the trading amount is the fourth largest, and the labor population the eighth. So that meaning there's a lot of the jobs and the cross-border business in Japan. And actually, the foreign workers, numbers of the foreign workers is increased the 3 times over the last decades. And the main reason is not just fill out the population shortage, but many the startups, the Japanese startups, is looking for the AI talent or the global blockchain talent from the global market.
Thank you, Mr. Nakajima. I think it's interesting how it makes sense that during COVID, your business really thrived. But even before, I think this movement of digital nomad population working from everywhere was already happening. So this year really accelerated your business. And I'm really happy that you're here to talk about how Japan is part of this huge global movement in the workplace. Okay, Mark, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shiho, for that generous introduction, and thank you for leaving out the dirty parts. It's also a pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists. Justin, nice to see you again, and Nakajima-san, very nice to see you. So as you mentioned, I was actually born in Silicon Valley, but I'm half French, and I spent most of my childhood in Silicon Valley starting a couple companies. 3 to be exact. One of them exited during the dot-com bubble, so that dates me a little bit. The other 2 were failures. I learned more from the failures, I would submit. And then for the last 20 years, I've been investing, mostly in France as a venture capitalist. And what I noticed when I moved to Tokyo 5 years ago were a lot of similarities with the French venture ecosystem of 15 years earlier. So, and this actually, the reason I mentioned France is this very much inspired the story behind Shizen Capital. France, about 15 years ago, it was a pretty desolate landscape for venture startups and for investing. Innovation happened, but innovation was generally the incremental type. It was siloed inside large corporations. Young people, they were encouraged to pursue careers in large companies, go to a top school, but certainly not join a startup or start a company themselves. People were generally risk averse. And if you did start a company and you failed, you would be stigmatized from society. Obviously I witnessed a lot of these similarities when I moved here, but I also realized that France over the last 15 years, it really transformed itself. Today, it's arguably the top startup hub in Europe, one of the top in the world. It has over a dozen unicorns. And the thinking behind Shizen with my co-founder was that if France can do this, if France can transform itself, then surely, as Nakajima-san said, an economy that's double the size, double the GDP, double the population, with some pretty amazing macroeconomic opportunities in front of it, i.e. Japan, surely Japan can do it. And our mission with Shizen Capital is actually to finance early stage, first-time founders, emerging entrepreneurs, especially women and minorities in Japan, to move quickly, to back them early and give them an opportunity to help transform Japan. We're pretty optimistic about what we're seeing here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. It's interesting that you saw parallel between Japan and Europe. And I think it's really cool that more and more foreign investors are coming into Japan and see opportunities in Japan and for Japanese companies to take their businesses to global. So it's very exciting. The next question. What are the opportunities and challenges that are unique to the Japanese market? Mark, do you want to take this first?
Yeah, happy to do so. Thank you, Shiho. So I might be the newest arrival here to the venture ecosystem in Tokyo, so measure my answer with that context. But I would submit that still today, the Japanese market is relatively opaque to the outside world. I think this represents both a challenge for the outsiders, but also an opportunity for VCs who can manage to establish a foothold inside this market. As investors, I would say our biggest challenge at Shizen Capital is actually finding co-investors who are agile enough and can move as quickly as we believe is necessary to back some of these early stage companies. Generally, my belief is that for early stage startups, time is one of the most precious assets of the founder. And there's a perception among a lot of investors, I would say a misconception even, that a wait and see approach will de-risk an investment. In fact, just this week, I received a request from an entrepreneur for some advice who has a potential investor expressing interest to back his early stage company. And they've asked him for historical financial statements and a 5-year business plan. This is a seed stage company. This is pre-LOI, pre-term sheet. And I don't know, actually, I'll turn it over to Justin. Did Sequoia ask you, Justin, for 5 years business plan and historical financial statements before they entered into discussions and had a pitch meeting with Playco?
No, I mean, but we'll say, relationships are something that I think everybody who's in the ecosystem realizes, to your point, I guess, which is like, it's very non-transactional, right? And you end up befriending people or working with people in some capacity, even in a very small way, that later ends up snowballing, and you find more things to work on. And you realize that the community more broadly is it's not like a big company, but your paths will cross over and over again. And so the one sort of piece of context you get when you've been doing it for a while is that you'll always be surprised by the ways that you can work with people later, and the different people that you've worked with in some capacity who are now in another company or another new firm, and the new ways you can work together. And so for us, like, one of the ways that you've more quickly, I think, in Silicon Valley is you have that critical mass of a network of relationships of people who've been working together for a long time. And certainly for us, I think that was a part of it. But I will say that, we're seeing investors like Tiger come in and treating this more like the public markets, where they're very comfortable investing based on a basic set of information, and they're creating transformation up and down the whole sort of investor ecosystem. So everything seems to be trending toward more speed.
Point taken. Mark, how about opportunities? I think you touched upon that in the first question already, but if there is anything to add to that.
Well, I actually like to present it as Japan has a first mover advantage. And sometimes people scratch their heads when I say that. How could Japan have a first mover advantage? And what I mean by that is, if you look at Japan today, Nakajima-san mentioned some of these points, that aging population, corporate stagnation. I read just this week the debt to GDP ratio of Japan is over 250%. You have a talent shortage that we're all feeling acutely. These are serious macroeconomic challenges. Japan is in the lead on these challenges, but it's not unique. I think every developed country is going to face them. Germany is already starting to face some of these challenges. But Japan is actually in the lead on them, and the solutions to these challenges often will require innovation, maybe disruptive innovation, technology. So given that Japan is in advance on these challenges, it naturally follows that Japan will be the first mover market for the innovative solutions to these potential problems. So that, to me, I see as a tremendous opportunity for Japan. It means for domestic startups, there's a very interesting market. And for even foreign startups, in some cases, the innovation maybe is not on the ground in Japan, but it will be sought out by foreigners because the market is in Japan first.
Thank you. Well, having said that, Mark, tell us which specific areas you think we should be excited about when it comes to startups in Japan.
Well, I don't prescribe, but I'll tell you what I'm excited about. So, and just what I'm witnessing. Obviously, one of the most frequently heard buzzwords in the enterprise in Japan is enterprise DX. And when I explain DX to my European colleagues or my American colleagues that haven't been in Japan, they don't know what DX means. But all of us on this call know that it's enterprise digital transformation. And so enterprises in Japan, as previously mentioned, they've had decades of corporate stagnation. They're looking for solutions to that. They haven't necessarily digitized as quickly as other developed countries, corporations. And so there's this, and they have $13 trillion, by the way, on the balance sheet to spend on this. So there's this sense of urgency to digitize. This was in some ways accelerated by the pandemic that we saw, where investors in companies that are doing, for example, digital signature, very basic technology that's existed for over a decade in the US and in Europe, but is now just really taking off here in Japan. So I'm excited about DX. The second thing I'll add quickly is I'm excited about solutions around sustainability, particularly sustainability and benchmarking and tooling for Japanese corporations who will need to increasingly comply with an evolving regulatory environment. We're seeing, in fact, there was a funding announced just the other day of a domestic company offering these tools. Europe happens to be quite advanced because of the compliance requirements were stricter earlier. So we actually are looking at a lot of European startups that are targeting Japan. So that's the second. And then the third is around financial innovation, which is the theme of this conference. But I'll leave it to the next two panelists to add on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Justin, how about you? Unique challenges and opportunities in Japan.
Like a lot of things, I think the challenges are the reason for the opportunities. And so just to echo Takayuki's point from earlier, I think that we have a very, very large and deep market in Japan. And like Mark mentioned, it's going through some changes that many countries in the world will be going through soon that may bring some opportunities earlier to this market that can later be exported. The solutions can be exported to other markets. And so that's exciting. I think one of the things Japan has always benefited from is having being forced to focus on how to serve a customer to an extreme extent. And I don't mean culturally, I mean economically. I think we always think about the cultural side of this, but people don't talk as much about the economic side, which I think drives a lot of it. And so this idea that a lot of large companies in Japan, of course, they've expanded internationally, but they've really focused on going deep with the customers in Japan and servicing them in the best way possible. And if you think about this, it's really the sort of opposite approach that most Western companies have taken, especially in America. The main way that you anticipate expanding your business is to go broader, it's to go wider. And in Japan, historically, it's been to go deeper. And I think what's encouraging about the new internet economy is, like, if I were to say Web 1.0 is kind of getting things up and the basic services on the internet on open source layers, and Web 2.0 was about interactivity and communication. Web 3.0 seems to be about like a direct relationship between customers and someone who's providing value to them. And the sort of companies that are facilitating it are increasingly becoming less and less important, and it's becoming decentralized. And so this sort of relationship where it's about how much value can you provide to someone specifically looking for what you're selling or what you can offer them, it reminds me a lot of Tokyo. To be completely honest with you, like, there are some things about people see in the West when they look at a country like Japan, they say, can you believe they sell something like this in some small little store in Akihabara? Isn't that so interesting? Isn't that so strange? How could they possibly have such a thing? And what I would say is, like, it's not cultural. It's actually, there's 40 million people in Tokyo, and there's a market for everything. And someone who likes that particular thing will seek out that store and go and find that very, very, very particular thing that would never be viable on a small street in San Francisco, where there are only 800,000 people living. And so in some ways, Tokyo is like the internet. It's like the bigger and denser market you get of people that have money to spend on things, well, then the more diverse things you'll see. And so I feel like actually Japan, when you think about like fragmentation and moving toward a world where millions and hundreds of millions of people are operating their own small businesses, that's actually a lot like what Japan has been doing physically for quite a long time. And so in that way, many of these businesses and much of this this culture should actually be applicable and more easily brought online than in countries where, like, this is not the case. And so I'm very excited about Japan's opportunities to use its expertise in serving customers very deeply and bringing that online. I think that's going to be a huge part of the opportunity. When it comes to how that could be part of sort of financial technology, I think we've been seeing this with NFTs on the blockchain. And what we've been seeing is that there's an opportunity to form a very, very deep relationship with a customer where they want to buy into your community and they're so passionate about it, they're willing to spend more and they want to have a deeper connection to it with more skin in the game. And this, to me, feels a lot like something Japan's been doing for a long time. If you look at the idol groups in Japan, or these types of these pop stars, this types of businesses that are being used in Japan, these business models, they didn't exist in the US. The types of schemes that exist with groups like AKB, where you buy multiple CDs to get some reward, and these loyalty programs, these are unique to Japan, but this looks a lot like what's happening on the internet now. And so what I would say is, like, the technology might be new, but the psychology is not new. And this is something Japan has a lot of experience in a huge, huge, deep market of fans and this type of behavior to go and leverage into this new economy. In many ways, it's very far ahead on this point.
Thank you, Justin. That is such an interesting perspective, and it is very, very true. So thank you for sharing that. By the way, Justin, I read in your interview somewhere that you think that, Japan headquarters of Playco is serving as a sort of like an entrance to get to China and rest of Asia, as Playco looks beyond Japan and the US market. Is that true? Do you see Japan's opportunity as an entrance gateway to rest of Asia?
I think that's something that it's very strategic to have management and a focus and a headquarters in Asia. At this point, I think what we've seen is within games in particular, that about 10 years ago, something like 8 out of the top 10 game companies in the world were based in the US. And now, actually, more than 8 out of 10 of the top 10 game companies in the world are based outside of the US. There's been a complete inversion in games and where these companies are headquartered, and many of them are in Europe. So you're seeing them in Europe and Asia, they're everywhere. We're even seeing huge studios in South America. And so I think what's happening is everything's becoming more distributed. And what we've realized is the talent is spreading with these large companies. They're training the next generation of people in games and technology. And where it used to be that you'd have to pull people out of entertainment, that we're all stuck in sort of California, they're everywhere now. And so we wanted to build a company where our company's footprint, it looks like where the talent is. And clearly there's a huge amount of game talent in Japan. And so we want to be positioned to actually work with the best and most experienced people. And that means having a company that has a global footprint. And I think when it comes to games, Japan has the deepest talent pool in Asia, but certainly like is a great place to be a base for other parts of Asia as well.
Thank you, Justin. How about you, Mr. Nakajima?
Yes, sure. So the first, I'm very agree about Justin and Mark mentioned the Japan's the unique point is of course the large the economy and the culture is very uniqueness. But I think I'd like to touch a little bit more about the challenging side. So the first that I have the experience. I was in the venture capital in Japan as well, and I felt that especially the younger generation of the startups company very understanding about the global sense and the diversity is very important. Everyone not understand. But I think the majority of the Japanese company still that doesn't understand really well about these things and doesn't feel about the risk about the futures and very satisfied with the demand from Japan. And so the most startup strategies, the first very commit to the Japanese market first. And if they make the successful business in Japan, then they're going to the next country or the global countries. But when we think about the funding amount or the speed of the growth, I think that kind of the strategy is a little bit difficult to make a big success in a global market, I feel. And I just want to say, from the Deel's point of view, when we think of when we see our client, I think the making the diverse organization is very, very important part to make the business successful in global market. And diverse organization means the variety of the nationality and the culture get together and understand the each country's pain point or demands, and that we can resolve these issues as soon as possible. And the Deel itself is the diverse organization itself, and we gather the people over 50 countries, and everyone try to contribute to resolve these issues together. And I think that the culture is very important to adopt in the Japanese companies.
That is a very important point. Thank you, Mr. Nakajima. So my last question is, what do you want to see in the future of the Japanese startup scene? So, Mr. Nakajima, how about you?
Okay, sure. So what I want to say is that soon or later, the most vertical industry services is going to be the online, and there is no border across the countries. And like our company, the legal tech or the fintech or the HR tech, this makes the borders in terms of for example, the labor law, taxes, or the currencies. And in addition to that, the new technology like real-time translation technology, for example, that will be available soon. And that's meaning the real borders world is coming soon, even in Japan. So that meaning that the global players aims to go to the Japanese market. So I want to say that Japanese company needs to understand that this innovation trend and everyone needs to focus how to make the business the global market. That I want to say. So I think the very important part is making the diverse organization. This is a very important part I want to say. And can I say about the additional things? So for my personal goal in Deel, the Deel helps not support the startups, but also I'd like to resolve the social issue in Japan through the Deel. And one of the biggest the challenging in Japan is the reducing the labor population and the aging, especially in the local regions. This is what maybe the Justin said, that this is one of the unique things. But through the Deel, this kind of the issue can make the resolve. And for example, the local government or the company can hire the remote workforces that can fill out the shortage of the population maybe. Or the other idea is that not just the Japanese people, but also that the foreign people living in Japan can find out the overseas job easily. And I understand one of my friends, the foreign people really likes the Japan, and he wants to continue to live in Japan. However, it is hard to find the great job. Such kind of the cases I saw sometimes. And if we can resolve this kind of things, and then maybe that resolve the people shortage, but also I hope to make something of the diverse community in Japan that I'd like to make it in a futures.
I think what Deel is doing is truly empowering to a lot of people. And as you mentioned, Japan has an aging problem, decreasing population, and diversity issue. I think Deel is truly innovative company that is a good force in the Japanese society. Great. How about Justin?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the world as the borders shrink and disappear, it's becoming more about communities and less about nations. And I think the role of a nation is becoming different in this next phase that we're heading into. And so when I think about the people on this call and the things we have in common, we may even not be in the same physical space, but we share a lot of our values. And I think the world is reorganizing in that sort of way. And I think companies like Deel or Workco or other companies that allow this sort of international employment are definitely part of this. I think blockchain is a huge part of it. I think what we're seeing is people are organizing themselves into people of like-minded to themselves. And I think when we think about expansion in companies, we always think about from a sort of geographical perspective. Oh, you're in Japan, and then you expand to Asia, and then you expand to the US. I don't think that's how a lot of modern internet companies work. And for a SaaS company or an enterprise company, it's true, because you need to have a sales team and they still need to go take meetings with these companies. But for consumer companies, we're very much moving toward a place where people are expanding community by community. And so what does this mean for Japan? Japan has an amazing set of communities, very dense, passionate communities. And that's in large part because of a dense population. And the internet is seeing these communities for the first time because these populations that were so sparse, spread all across the world, are finally able to connect to each other in a way that they have enough throughput to discuss the things they love and to transact and to do interesting things. And I think one of the things that's made Japan so vibrant, and Tokyo in particular, is that it's had this in a physical form. And so the question is, like, how do you take that head start and put it online faster? What does Shopify look like? To me, Shopify looks like Harajuku. I mean, the fact that all these people are able to sell anything they want and to bring new fashion on the street, this is something that we were seeing in the physical form, and now it's brought online. And so I think Japan has a huge amount to provide in that area. And what I would say over the next decade, I mean, if I could just, I think this idea of bringing in sort of foreign concepts and mixing the best ideas, it's been a part of Japan's history for a long time. I was reading Fukuzawa Yukichi's autobiography recently, and the founder of KO. And one of the things that made his founding principles of KO so powerful was exactly that he visited the U.S. He spent a lot of time in the U.S. He got these ideas and he came back. And so I love this idea of cross-pollination of ideas where people are taking the best from one place and bringing it to another. And I think the more diversity that we get, the better the ecosystem will end up over the next 10 years. So I think it's a real opportunity to take this huge head start Japan has in many ways and turn it into something much bigger.
Thank you. Fantastic. How about Mark? Any hopes for the Japanese startup scene going forward?
Yeah, thanks. So I want to just pick up on this very last concept that Justin mentioned of cross-pollination across geographies and across cultures. And I think that actually fits perfectly with what Nakajima-san was saying about diversity. And actually, I couldn't agree more. It's a shared value that we have. For, of course, there's a moral case to it, but there's also a very good, strong, compelling business case around innovation. When you have a diverse team and a diverse set of viewpoints from the beginning in the DNA of the project, it opens up more opportunities. It creates this cross-pollination effect of diverse viewpoints and inputs that can actually imagine something even more powerful. And the critical thing, actually, in my view, is that it's in the DNA. It's from the beginning of the company. In some ways, when you think about Japan, in terms of the old model of geographies, so Japan it's a big market, but it's not necessarily big enough for many types of startups to be entirely solely focused on the domestic market. You could argue that the U.S. American startups, they can maybe never go outside of America and stay purely American up to the first few billion. You could make the same argument maybe for China, but otherwise, it's about having this diversity of viewpoints early on to think about attacking a global market. In some ways, the Europeans had a bit of a historical advantage in this, because when you think about it, what is Europe? It's a market of 350, 400 million people, but it's actually a very fragmented market of a collection of very different cultures. For example, that when you are hosting a French dinner party and your French friend criticizes your cooking, it's actually a compliment. And vice versa, if a Brit tells you must come for dinner, it's actually an insult. The completely different cultures that mix. So I remember maybe 15, 20 years ago in Germany, startups would present a 5-year plan, let's say, and in year 1 through 3, it would be entirely focused on the German market. Then maybe in year 4, it would be international expansion. And international expansion at that time meant Austria and German-speaking Switzerland. That's totally changed today, as Justin was saying. It's finding these communities. It transcends these geographical borders, and it's about finding these communities. And that actually is potentially where Japan has a big advantage. So just to conclude on this point about diversity, it's easy for us to say, especially me. Look, I'm an old white guy, and I'm talking about diversity. In reality, I should be making a difference every day. I should do something every day. And so at our fund at Shizen, we actually make it a metric. We have, as of today, 11 active investments. 4 of them are led by women. I think we can do better, but it's something we track. That's the important thing. We also have certain types of terms when we invest in portfolio companies that future fundraising rounds, we must carve out space for women-led funding groups. So that I would say that's maybe one point. Another point I would add beyond the diversity is coming back to something I said earlier, that the importance at the early stage for startups to have financial backers that can be agile and decisive and move quickly. And it's kind of, there's a divergence of interests when funding an early stage company. From the founder's perspective, their interest is raise the funding and then get back to building their company because there's an opportunity that they want to pursue. From the investor's perspective, it could be, well, let's wait and see. Let's see how the company evolves. Let's keep collecting data. Let's look at their data room, because the more data we have, the lower our risk, the easier it will be to be comfortable. The trouble with this thinking is it does a disservice to the entrepreneur, of course, who's spending an inordinate amount of bandwidth on the fundraising process rather than building their company. But I would even submit that it does a disservice to the investor, because at some point, too much time goes by and the market has changed. The opportunity has changed. The core advantage or the core vision that was maybe seen needs to change. And so everyone's missed an opportunity for doing something potentially disruptive. I would even submit that, this behavior for investors is kind of like living in the past, looking for data, patterns of data, as opposed to what I would submit every VC should be doing, which is live in the future.
Thank you, Mark. You all expressed hope for the future of the Japanese startup scene. I heard diversity represented in the startup's culture, as well as agility built into the team that makes you truly globally competitive as a startup. Now we have come to the end of the session. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. We'll be looking forward to seeing you thrive in Japan and beyond. Now, I would like to say thank you to our audiences from around the world. Please check wff.jp for our speakers' full bio and SNS links so you can follow their exciting journeys ahead. And enjoy the rest of WFF Japan. See you next time.